This is David Tulis, 92.7, FM 95.3, HD4. We are looking at the reasons for the massacre at the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. And it's important to do that here by an act of imagination, let's just say, because the same thing can happen in Chattanooga. In fact, there are people here in town today, here in Hamilton County, who are on the edge of their minds, on the very they're not seated in their reason. They are on the edge, and some have already thought about doing what this courageous man did, Devin Patrick Kelly, yesterday morning during the worship service at this church in a small town. It's not known exactly what the man's connection is with the worshipers at that church, but Frank Pomeroy, the minister, and his wife were not in town, and there was a supply man at the pulpit that Lord's Day when Devin Patrick Kelly came in. And I'm thinking what some of the things might be that Frank Pomeroy has already made note of on his yellow legal pad that is one of his usual starting points for a sermon. He has the sermon passage in mind, but I'm confident that he's already thinking differently. And in fact, he may be resorting back to the Puritans. He has on his shelf, I'm willing to suppose, a copy of Thomas Watson's book, All Things for Good. Thomas Watson is a Puritan divine. And when there is a real crisis, when there is death at hand, when there is the need for an explanation of the sovereignty of God, where we have a desire to hear how it is that a good God can allow and in fact ordains evil things to happen even to his people, even on his day, even in his house, one resorts to the Reformed faith. One resorts to the Puritans. And All Things for Good is the renamed version of it from the book first published in 1663, A Divine Cordial. A cordial is a medicine, okay? And so the question in this very slim volume put out by Banner of Truth Trust is the necessity under God's grace to deal with adversity and to see how even in events that are wicked, caused by wicked men, there is a purpose. There is a purpose, and that the last thing that any Christian needs to think is that God somehow was not in control, that somehow God blinked and Devin Patrick Kelly suddenly jumped out from his car with his semi-automatic belt, long clip rifle at hand. God blinked, or God was taking a nap. Those, of course, are the accusations that Elijah made against the false prophets there in the Old Testament, where he said, "Where is your God?" Maybe he's taking a nap, when he said that their God could not light the sacrifice, whereas the true God did, in fact, consume the whole altar. The other deities presented and pretended by their adherents were sleeping. They were on vacation. They had their ears stopped up with wax. The real God, of course, is always there, and he doesn't just allow things; he ordains things, and nothing explains that better than the Puritans. I think Reverend Pomeroy will start there. He will look at books such as All Things for Good and have at hand the pithy sayings of the divine. His name is Thomas Watson, and I have gone through my cop with great care, and I've marked it completely up. I'm thinking of sending a copy of it to a prison inmate I know, but to have that, I can't send my copy. I have to have it sent from the publisher. That's the only way I think a prisoner can get a book, is if it comes directly from the publisher and not from a secondhand source like me. And the point that Thomas Watson makes is that there always is a purpose in suffering. There's always a purpose in the presence of evil in the world. God uses evil as part of his overall government. God does not respond to evil. God does not, of course, is not to be blamed for it. But evil men, driven by their evil desires and their lusts, they will do what free will dictates to them to do in the way that they are equipped by God's providence to do it. There was no way for Jonah to be saved but by being swallowed up. He says, God suffered the Egyptians to hate Israel, and this was the means of their deliverance. The Apostle Paul was bound with a chain, and that chain which did bind him was the means of enlarging the gospel in Philippians 1:12. God enriches by impoverishing. He causes the augmentation of grace, Watson says, by the diminution of an estate. When the creature goes further from us, it is that Christ may come nearer to us. God works strangely. He brings order out of confusion, harmony out of discord. He frequently makes use of unjust men to do that which is just. He is wise in heart, Job 9:4. He can reap glory out of men's fury, Psalm 76:10. Either the wicked shall not do the hurt that they intend, or they shall do the good which they do not intend. God often helps when there is least hope and saves his people in that way which they think will destroy. He made use of the high priest's malice and Judas's treason to redeem the world. Through indiscreet passion, we are apt to find fault with things that will happen, which is as if an illiterate man should censure philosophy, or a blind man find fault with the work in a landscape. Vain man would be wise, Job 11. Silly animals will be taxing providence and calling the wisdom of God to bar of reason. God's ways are past finding out, we read in Romans 11:33. They are rather to be admired than fathomed. There is never a providence of God, but has either a mercy or a wonder in it. That's the kind of thing that Reverend Pomeroy will be thinking about, and he will preach sermons about that for the next year from various parts in the scripture. Our job here today on the David Tulis Show is to look into you might say, the deep background of why this happened and to explain why it can happen here. And it can happen here because, as Piterim Sorokin, the Russian sociologist who headed the Harvard sociology department after World War II, says, we are at the end of an age, an end of a 500-year-long period, which he calls the breaking down of what he terms is sensate culture. And sensate culture arose from the breaking apart slowly over the decades of what he calls ideational culture. And that is the culture of the Reformation, which last Tuesday we marked the 500th year of. And Devin Patrick Kelly, an atheist, was living out his ideals in his mission. His mission in that church, with his rifle blazing, the flashing of the muzzle, pretty big if you didn't have a flash suppressor on that M4 Ruger copy. The muzzle flashing, of course, there's no word of sound suppression, but he fired point blank at old men, old women, the fat and the thin, the broken, the strong, the athletic, the woman, the child, the senior citizen, the grayhead, all shot down, 26 people in all, in a viscerally delivered sermon. This was a sermon not of words, which is how Christianity expands itself, by words, but it was a sermon delivered by power, by a top-down form of power, which is, of course, the ideal of the progressive state and the ideal of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. The Republican Party defending the old socialist ideals, and the Democratic Party defending the more radical new socialists of our day. And so this use of power, this doctrine of power, is possible in the individual. The individual can assert power, which, of course, is part of what George Knupfer calls the urge of mass destruction. It's there in societies, it's there in culture, and we can have it also in evidence in the individual. Now, my analysis is that Devin Patrick Kelly was living out the existentialist dilemma, and I'll explain what that is. So it sounds like a big word, but if you want to know what existentialism is, you can hear my synopsis here on the David Tulis Show at 92.7 live on Facebook. We are live, by the way, on Facebook at Nooga Radio, and also at YouTube on the Hot News Talk radio channel. This is hot. We are the hottest, newsiest radio station in Chattanooga. We are the media platform, from the Man Who Matters, and this show is brought to you by the website for the Man Who Matters, where deep state analysis actually occurs. We have in Tennessee a deep state, and no writer in Tennessee covers it like I do, and I don't know why that is. But Eric Shelzick at the AP And even our best journalists, Dave Flessner, Judy Walton, and David Carroll here in Chattanooga, they are the leading journalists. They don't cover the deep state. They just don't. Judy Walton gets closest, I would say, in her work, some of her investigative work. One most recently that has brought an indictment against a sheriff for abusing parts of Title 55, the Transportation Code, and the use of papers and whatnot to affect the transfer of cars and automobiles, or should I say, motor vehicles, in Bradley County. Now, Devin Patrick Kelly is a follower of the deconstructionist theory. Deconstructionism is something that you find at UTC. I'm not sure who the leading proponent of that theory, literary theory, is there, but deconstruction is, you might say, the literary part of the postmodernist argument. Postmodernism is a rebuttal to humanism. Both of them are highly unstable systems, and they don't stand a chance against devout Christian doctrine, by the way, but they are the dominant cultural rhetoric, and we see them played out in the media, and they play toward power. Some of their proponents are backers of authoritarianism and National Socialism. I think of Paul DeMann and Heidegger, among others. They're all socialists, or you might say Nazi supporters. But deconstructionism and that thinking, I got to very honestly through C.S. Lewis in his book. I think it's called A Literary Critique or Literary Criticism. It's a red volume. I don't have it here, but it was a wonderful book about the act of reading and how we can, in a way, judge a book by how it's read, how the effect of reading, how a book is, you might say, consumed. Deconstruction holds that there is no canon, there is no authority in a text, and in the literary side of things, the author is removed, and what the critic, the consumer, if you will, does is deconstruct the text. It takes apart the text to find all the power subtext, and that is what it is. It's either authoritarianism, it's either patriarchalism, or some theory is being attacked by the text. The theories being attacked, of course, would be humanism or feminism, things of that kind. Egalitarianism. These are all the text is a mask for a psychopolitical kind of argument. And you're saying, well, what does this have to do with the gunman in Texas? Well, he was doing that very thing, but with human beings. He was taking apart human beings, and you might say finding the subtext in their death. But in deconstruction, what happens is that in that idea, everything is converted into a text. In other words, all of life is just a narrative. There's a meta-narrative, and we all have our small narratives within it. It sounds really complicated, but it's really fascinating, and especially if you're involved in that line of philosophizing, which is very attractive. I find myself very attracted to that, by the way, and was a practitioner of it when I was working on a master's degree at UT. In deconstruction, all truth claims are suspect. There is no claim of truth that is true. There are multiple competing truths. There is no such thing as a verity. There is no truth. We all have our own private truths, and it may not be yours. Okay, that's the perspective of deconstructionism, and that is the perspective of postmodernism. That is a reigning paradigm today in Chattanooga and Hamilton County. It's called postmodernism. And Devin Patrick Kelly, an atheist who rejected God, was at war with God. His massacre of those 26 people and the injuring of many others was an assault on God. But of course, to slap God in the face, you have to be sitting on his lap, which of course he did. He did, because that morning he urinated and felt relief. He had something to eat and felt relief. He drank something and felt relief. He looked at his sturdy weapon and felt relief about that. He was secure. He was good. He was right. He had good body armor on. Things about his life that he liked, he took pleasure in thinking about them, because this was his last day, and he was going to live out his supreme authentic self in the act that ended in his either his suicide or his death. It's not quite clear how he died. He may have been hit by a sharpshooter at the neighboring house to that church, who took at least a couple of shots at him as he was driving away. But he was chased. Devin Patrick Kelly was chased 30 miles or so before he ran off the road. Your God is wrong. Okay, this is part of his sermon, Devin Patrick Kelly's sermon notes. Your God is wrong and foolish, and I'm going to prove it to you. Look, he can't stop me, and I'm going to pull the trigger, and I'm going to put red spots on your face. I'm going to put red spots on your chest, and as you're falling over the pew, I'm going to put a red spot on your back. And that's how, borrowing from Hemingway, that's how people are killed. Red spots suddenly are appearing on their body, and the gun keeps jerking in his shoulder. That's how Hemingway would describe death in his stories and in his novels. There's a supreme detachment. You're not doing things; you are watching them being done by some unknown force, and that's how he went into this church and started killing people. It was in a movie. He was in a shooter video, watching the people go down, firing. He didn't see anybody with a gun, so there was a moment of leisure that he had as he pulled the trigger. He reloaded. People were screaming and shouting. It was a tremendously exciting scene in that church as he gunned down these innocent people. And their God was not going to stop him. Their God was impotent to stop him. Their God could not stop and could not protect his people. Where are his angels now? He wasn't actually thinking that. He was not really thinking theologically at that point. He was thinking tactically. But had he had time to reflect, had he had time to scrape off ideas from the back part of his mind, if the ideas in the front part of his mind had just quietened down for a minute, those would be the thoughts I suggest that Devin Patrick Kelly felt. I can put more red spots on you, and hell, leave me alone. I'm busy. That's what he thought. That's the kind of thing that a man who's killing innocent people, trying to have a sense of emotion, trying to have some feeling, that is what he feels. That is what he says to himself. He is a part of an atomized society, and Sorokin is very good in his magnificent work, The Crisis of Our Age, and other writers as well. I'm thinking about Gene Edward Veith. I'm holding up his book here, Postmodern Times. If you want to learn how this is going to work out in Chattanooga, read Postmodern Times, A Christian Guide to Contemporary Thought and Culture by Gene Edward Veith. I couldn't find this morning another book of his that I read with great care and marked with great care about deconstruction and postmodernism. You might say the whole idea that life is just a text and a subtext within a meta-narrative, right? The whole intellectualization of common life. Devin Patrick Kelly was part of the atomization of society. You give me an atomized, meaningless life, he says, and so I'm going to give it back. I'm going to give it back to you here. And that's what he did there. Why do people think like that? Well, they think like that because, indeed, society has been atomized. It has been atomized by dechristianization, by a loss of what Sorokin calls the ideational culture. And that is, especially in America and in Europe, there is very little real gospel being preached. Though there are individual pious Christians all about, they have no sense of the larger cultural issues. They are incapable, having been badly taught by their pulpits, they're incapable of thinking of the larger issues, how Christianity, for example, interacts with the arts, how it interacts with literature, how it interacts with mathematics. Read James Nichols' book on mathematics. Christians have no sense of how God interacts with courtrooms, with prosecutions, with state law, with the use of transportation codes to oppress the poor and the mobile. Your God is worthless, your God is useless, and there's nothing he can do to help you, and I'm here to take your life from you. And for me, it's a matter of indifference. That's what Patrick Kelly was saying. And in his analysis of the atomized society is probably correct. We are atomized. There are no intervening bodies, really, even though we are an institutional society in the United States, even here in Chattanooga. There are institutions, there are nonprofits everywhere you turn. We don't have families anymore, but we have a lot of institutions. We have a lot of welfare organizations, a lot of state-funded, state-led organizations, churches, clubs, groups, teams, associations, families, kin, and neighborhood have faded strongly since the 1800s. And there's just me. It's just me. That's what Devin Patrick Kelly was saying. And that's why, in a way, he was a courageous man. It was Devin Patrick Kelly against an impersonalist, totalist, colossalist world. He had. I'm trying to think of where I get the term from. Oh, here it is. It's he was a victim of quantitative colossalism. That's a sociological term. And let's just say, for brief, that is an he was. The world has become so colossal. Systems are so great. There are no intervening bodies. It's just me and the state. It's just me and it. Right? The world has become impersonal. The world is total. It's all encompassing. It's all alienating. And that's why people commit suicide, especially single men. Younger men are the most prone to suicides. And there are two kinds. There's egotistical suicide, and then there's anomic suicide. It's suicide by loneliness. Both of them involve isolation and loneliness. And Devin Patrick Kelly had that in his very heart, very heart. And that's why I think it's fair to say that his love and his hate are the same act. He can kill someone as soon to rape someone, as soon to make love to someone, as soon to buy someone lunch and listen attentively to that person's problems. To him, they're all the same. It's all the same phenomenon. And he is psychosocially isolated. He's by himself, and he has nothing else. And what he did in his massacre would have the approval of Jean-Paul Sartre and all the intellectuals, right? Though they might say, oh, it's sad and it's evil and it's wicked, they really don't have grounds for saying that if they reject the gospel. If they reject Christianity, who can say that killing 26 people in a church is bad? Who's to say that? The only way you can say that is to be inconsistent and borrow from the gospel, to borrow from the law of God in the 6th commandment, which says you shall not kill. You shall not kill. You can borrow that. Go ahead and borrow it. That's fine. But the existentialist, the one who follows Jean-Paul Sartre and all modern forms of it, again, believing in the atomized society, creating the atomized society, they are in a way noble, just as in Paradise Lost, Milton's Lucifer is a noble creature. In fact, Milton made Lucifer attractive because he wanted you to feel the draw of the noble rejection of God by God of Lucifer. He wanted you to feel that. And so he made Lucifer a very attractive figure in the English language's greatest epic poem, Paradise Lost. Jean-Paul Sartre is the creator of existentialist thought. He said that you are the most genuine the moment that you're most true to your own truth. You are the most genuine. You are the most authentic. You are the most truly human. The moment that you put yourself on the line and argue that your truth is the most true and you'll die for it. And that's what Devin Patrick Kelly did. He died for his argument of what the truth is. So the humanists, the postmodernists, and those who are enjoying the fruit of the atomized society will hail him as a hero. And in fact, he is going to spawn copycats, right? Will there be a copycat in Chattanooga? Will there be people who see what he did, rejecting God, slapping God in the face while sitting in his lap, which is what every atheist does, and be a hero? He had what the existentialists called the despair of freedom, the angst to be before nothing. And his murder of 26 people was him standing on the cliff. And the question is, am I scared because I'm going to fall over, or do I throw myself off? And because he rejected God, he threw himself off the cliff toward the rocks below. But as he went, he's going to pull down as many people as he can. If there had been more people in that church, if he'd had more ammo, he would have killed 50 if he could have. This is David Tulis, Nooganomics, brought to you by Nooganomics.com. Nooganomics.com.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3.